And I feel like that kind of brings us into our next point. A team that could be doing something great, and that's the Detroit Red Wings. Chris, they've strung together 7 straight wins, and there's some trade speculation surrounding them. I'm going to let you take it away.
So the other day I saw, and we talked about this, I believe, if not last week, the week before, where I brought up there was before the holiday shutdown, scouts between the Red Wings and Sabres at each other's games, and everyone was trying to figure out what the trade could be. It's now come out that it seems like the deal was done from what it sounds like right before shutdown, like right before the roster freeze, um, for Dylan Cozens to go to the Red Wings. Now, who knows what the return may have been? I haven't seen anything what it could have possibly looked like. Obviously, don't think it's coming cheap, but that fits in perfectly to what the Red Wings need. They need a second line center, and honestly, the idea as a Red Wings fan of having him center aligned with possibly DeBrincat and Kane on either side of him excites me because that first line right now with the 7 game win streak of Larkin, Casper, and Raymond has seemed like they've gelled. I mean, Casper probably I think yesterday was his third or fourth game on that top line because it was Joe Valeno when McClellan took over. But now Casper, I believe, is on a back-to-back point streak. It might even be 2 points in the last 2 games, 2 points per game in the last 2 games. Uh, but adding a center like that allows you to move somebody like Cop down to the third line, um, and move things around a little bit more, and maybe even clear out some space where maybe Cop is in the deal. I can't really see it. I don't know who would want him, but might be something to look at.
With kind of the whole thing with Kopp is he's more built to be a top 9 player. Is he excels in a third line role, but he's a player that you promote when
Mm-hmm.
you need him to be in that role. That's the exact mold he played in Winnipeg, and he's played that well in Detroit. So even when he was with the Rangers,
I
he was great on the third line, but when you need him to play up, he steps up. It's like Alex Iafallo at the moment. So,
I kind of like him on the idea of the third line playing with Tarasenko. I mean, that wouldn't be a bad line whatsoever.
and I don't want to say it's a sheltered role, but it's what he's done in his career, and that's where he's excelled, and that's where he's looked his best. So that could be a great addition for the Red Wings to do. I don't want to say addition by subtraction, but you get what I'm saying essentially.
I'd be more concerned with what they have to give up to get him. Like that's what worries me. What
Yeah.
is Buffalo asking for? Because there's obviously some young guys that, like somebody we talked about the other day, like Sandin Palika. Is he a guy that Buffalo's going to want? Obviously, I don't think Detroit's giving him up, but that's where it starts to worry me. Is what one of those assets that they have that played in maybe the World Juniors or is playing overseas and not with them yet, where they say, "Yeah, we're kind of loaded here. Let's move on from them." But at the same time, it's a piece that gets you over the hump in 3, 4 years and get you to a Stanley Cup. Because Steve Eisman keeps talking about we're not there yet. We're there for right now. We're a playoff team. We're not a Stanley Cup team. And so, like obviously, I think he sees it too, where there's those players coming that are going to get them over that hump. I don't want to see them make the mistake and move off of one of them that hurts them for a player like Cousins, who is going to help them, but it could also hurt you in the long run as well.
And when you mention Sandin Pelika, I don't see Detroit being open to give Buffalo one of their top defensive prospects when Buffalo is so loaded with defense right now. Like on paper, Buffalo has one of the best defense in the league, hands down, or one of the best. That might be a hot take to some people, but when I see a defense that has uh, Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, and Bowen Byram on it, I like the prospect of that. If you add Axel Sandin Pelika, and if he can perform in Buffalo or in even in Detroit, hypothetically in Buffalo, actually, let me correct myself there, and if he can perform in Detroit like he did at the World Juniors, then that's he'll have a great NHL career, and he's got a lot. he's got a lot to work towards, obviously, but is that a piece you really want to give up for a second line center
Nope.
right now?
Nope.
Like if I'm a GM right now, I don't want to. I would look at Sandin Pellikka, and I would almost be venturing to say, is he untouchable at the moment? And Chris, what do you think he's untouchable at the moment, or is he in the conversation for a bigger piece?
For me right now, I think he's untouchable. I
Okay,
think he's the piece that they need to anchor. Nothing against Sider, and I like Sider. He's your top defenseman, but I think realistically, Pellick is going to be their power play defenseman on the top unit, and I don't think you're
okay.
moving off of that.
And the the Red Wings, we've heard about the Yzer plan and whatnot for years and all that, and it gets a little hairy when you see the signings they made in the off season and who they have now. But hindsight can be 2020, and people I've read all over Twitter or X, whatever you'd like to call it. I've read all over about people knocking on Steve Eiserman for saying they are a playoff team, not a Stanley Cup team. How many teams can you look at right now in the NHL and truly say they are a Stanley Cup team?
Probably six
I was
off
going to
the top of my
say
head.
there's probably about 5 to 6 teams that I can truly look at the standings and say, you know what? I think so. And with that said, how many teams in the league right now can you look at and say they're not a Stanley Cup team, but give them in 2 to 3 years and watch the standings flip and watch them become that Stanley Cup contending team? We all know the window for a Stanley Cup contending team is not very long, which is why when a team is in that window, it's you're all in or you're not. And arguably, we've seen teams the last few years be in that Stanley Cup contention window, but they don't get over that hump because maybe they didn't have the right piece. Maybe they didn't. Maybe something just didn't click, and maybe they didn't push hard enough against a certain opponent, or just maybe it was all down to the luck they had. Like, it's so hard to point your finger on and say for a Stanley Cup contending team. And kind of circling back my thought here, if the Detroit Red Wings added Dylan Cozens right now, Chris, do you think that, and Jade as well, Chris and Jade, do you think if the Detroit Red Wings added Dylan Cozens right now for the player that he is, do you think that makes them remotely in the conversation of a Stanley Cup contending team?
No.
I don't think so. No,
Okay.
they're on kind of a heater right now. Obviously, I had to watch really, really, really awful hockey with them and the Kraken yesterday. And yeah, I don't think that they're going to be in the Stanley Cup team, even if they do add somebody like Dylan Cozens. So
Now, kind of with that in mind, if the Detroit Red Wings, with the projection that they are going to be as a team, do you see if they add a piece like Dylan Cozens, which is the second line centerpiece, if they add a second line center in 2 years from now, do you think that could get them to that point that they're looking to be that Stanley Cup contending team? Or do you think it's just going to be the adversity that this team needs to face together to build to that Stanley Cup contending window?
I think this young core needs to get playoff experience before they get to that point. I mean, Larkin, I think, got there only his rookie season. If not, it was his second season. But
One of them.
Sider and Raymond haven't been there. Obviously we know Kane has, but realistically, when this team is competing, I don't know if Kane's a Red Wing or if he's still playing in the NHL. I don't really know. DeBrincat has not been there. I don't believe. No, I don't think Chicago was good when he was there, unless it was like the beginning of his career as well.
Yeah.
But so I think they need to get that playoff experience, and then once the other young pieces come in, they'll have the leadership in Raymond, Sider, Edmondson, and Larkin that will be able to take those guys under their wing and get them ready to go when it comes playoff time and do what they have to do.
And kind of with that said, and my next thought is, are you hoping that you were entering the primes of players like Sider and Raymond when they have that playoff leadership experience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're starting to see the player that Lucas Raymond's going to be now, like the early signs of it. He's coming into his own. He's having one of his best offensive seasons. Sider looks great. You know, he's obviously more physical this year than I think he has been in more recent years, obviously. But especially it's like a different look, like I said, under McClellan. I mean, you're seeing guys like Jonathan Berggren come into his own. What was it? I think it was the Buffalo or Columbus game a couple weeks ago where Tyler Mott had that beautiful play down to Berggren who scored the game winner. I mean, you're just seeing guys who weren't doing anything under Lalone coming out of their shell and becoming better hockey players all around.
Guys who were given roles, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah. And that just kind of going on with the theme of trade talk and where teams may or may not be